Story 1. I've seen many strange things in my years teaching at West Hill High, but nothing has ever haunted me like that night on the football field. People in town still whisper about the cheer squad that never came home. Reports say they vanished into thin air. Some believe they ran away. Others think foul play. But none of them know the truth, because none of them were there with me when it happened, and God help me, I wish I hadn't been. It started on a crisp autumn evening. The football field was almost empty, the bleachers dark, except for the squad practicing one last time before Friday's big game. I was standing off to the side, arms crossed, watching their routine. They were good kids, full of life, laughing between moves, so energetic that it made me forget how late the hour had gotten. The floodlights buzzed overhead, casting long shadows on the turf. At first, I thought nothing of it when the lights flickered. These were old bulbs, after all. But the interruptions grew more frequent, and every time they blinked, I swore the shadows stretched farther across the grass, as if they weren't following the laws of light at all, but reaching. I rubbed my eyes, blamed it on fatigue, and kept watching. "All right, one more run-through," I shouted. The girls gathered themselves and started moving in sync, pom-poms flashing with each motion. Their chanting rose into the night, cheerful and practiced, until the lights above us dimmed so suddenly that we were left in near darkness. That was when the first girl vanished. I saw her arms lift high into a jump, saw her smile gleam beneath the floodlight. Then, as the lamps hissed and sputtered, her body seemed to dissolve, like smoke caught in a breeze. 1 second she stood there, mid-move, and the next, she was gone. The others screamed, stumbling out of formation, but before I could rush forward, the lights steadied again. And what I saw on the field will never leave me. The turf beneath where she had been was darker than the rest, a patch of black so deep it looked like the ground itself had opened. "What the hell?" I started, but the words caught in my throat, because the chanting hadn't stopped. It was still there, faint at first, echoing from the bleachers as if invisible spectators were sitting all around us, continuing the cheer routine. Yet the stands were empty, completely empty. Panic spread among the girls. One clung to another, screaming my name. I sprinted onto the field, trying to calm them, but the shadows surged again when the lights flickered. I swear to you, they weren't natural. They stretched like long black hands, coiling toward the squad. The second girl was next. She didn't even have time to cry out. Her feet seemed to sink into the darkness beneath her, and before my eyes, she dissolved. The other girls fled, scattering across the grass, their sneakers squeaking against the damp turf. I shouted for them to stay close, but my voice sounded drowned, swallowed by that ghostly chanting surrounding us. One by one, the shadows claimed them. One moment, they were running. The next, pieces of their bodies broke apart like ash in the wind. A pom-pom fell here. A shoe dropped there. Their voices cut off mid-scream, leaving only echoes that twisted with the eerie cheer that would not stop. I was frozen, helpless, as the cheer squad I had known for years vanished before my eyes, until suddenly, silence fell. The lights steadied. The shadows retreated as though they had never existed at all. And I was standing completely alone on the field. The bleachers were empty, the scoreboard dark. Only the wind moved, carrying a faint trace of laughter. I staggered across the grass, looking for any sign of them. My legs felt weak, my throat dry as bone. Their bags were still lined up neatly on the sidelines. Jackets, purses, phones, everything remained, except them. Then the chanting started again. It came not from the bleachers this time, but from beneath the field. A low, muffled unison chant, as though 100 voices were trapped beneath the soil, cheering endlessly. I clutched my head, terrified, stumbling toward the exit gate. But as I turned back for one last glance, I saw them. The shadows on the turf twisted into human shapes, dozens of them. The silhouettes of girls frozen in motion, arms raised in perfect formation. their heads tilted toward me, and all together they began to chant my name. I ran. I don't remember how I got to my car or how I managed to drive home. For weeks, I couldn't sleep. I told no one what I had seen. The police would never believe a word of it. They filed their reports and conducted their searches, but the girls were never found. Now, late at night, I sometimes hear the sound of distant cheering drifting in from outside my window. It doesn't matter if I'm in bed or in the kitchen or grading papers at my desk. It's always there, faint but steady, like it's waiting for me to step outside. And last night, I swear I saw the glow of the stadium lights flicker on, though no one had turned them on in months. Something still waits for me on that field, and I know one day it will call me down into the shadows too. Story 2. I should have listened when Emily said it was a bad idea. But there was something about the empty stadium that pulled me in that night. Maybe it was the thrill of doing something forbidden. Maybe it was just the adrenaline of sneaking around with her. Whatever it was, I wish I'd never stepped onto that football field. Because once you see what we saw, you can't unsee it. We slipped past the rusted gate just after midnight, laughing under our breath like kids daring each other to break the rules. The air was cold and still. The bleachers loomed tall and quiet, shadows swallowing most of the seats. With the floodlights off, the stadium looked like a giant mouth waiting to consume us. Creepy, Emily said, shivering. That's what makes it fun, I replied, trying to sound braver than I felt. We sat halfway up the bleachers, looking down at the wide green turf below. I remember her laughter echoing against the metal seats, light and cheerful. We whispered stupid jokes, tried to outscare each other with ghost stories, and for a while, it was just us, safe in the quiet of the night. Then we heard the whistle. It cut through the silence so sharply it made my chest jolt. Not a bird call, not some random sound, an unmistakable referee's whistle echoing across the field. Emily grabbed my arm immediately. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I nodded, but neither of us moved. We looked down at the field, and that's when the figures appeared. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me as shapes began to form beneath the dim moonlight. But they solidified quickly, an entire football team lined up on the grass. Their helmets gleamed faintly, their uniforms dark and impossible to make out. They were practicing, running drills in perfect rhythm. But the air was wrong. It was silent. Completely silent. The whistle continued to blow from somewhere unseen, yet the sound didn't match their movements. Their bodies crashed into one another, but there were no grunts, no footsteps, not even the sound of breathing. They were moving in silence like some god-awful pantomime. What the hell is that?" Emily stammered. I leaned forward, my throat dry, trying to see their faces, but the helmets were empty. No eyes, no flesh, no faces at all, just dark hollows staring upward toward us. That's when the closest player froze. His helmet tilted upward until it locked on us. Slowly, another turned, then another, until every faceless head was tilted back, staring through the darkness directly at us. Emily squeezed my arm so tightly it hurt, whispering for us to go. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. The whistle blew again, and the faceless players obeyed. One by one, their bodies jerked toward the bleachers. Unnatural, stiff movements, like broken marionettes controlled by invisible wires. Their legs snapped in sharp angles, their arms twisted too far as they walked, not ran, toward us. The first player reached the bottom of the bleachers and began to climb, his hand bending the wrong way around the rail as his hollow helmet tilted upward. The others followed, swarming to climb after him, their bodies twitching horribly with every jerking step. Emily let out a scream, high and raw, and yanked me to my feet. We stumbled up the rows of seats as the faceless team climbed closer, their helmets reflecting faint moonlight with every movement. Some of them moved faster, their jerks accelerating so violently the bleachers rattled beneath their weight. Metal groaned underfoot as though the whole structure was shaking itself apart. We bolted toward the exit at the top tier, but the squeal of twisting metal filled the air. I looked back only once and wished I hadn't. Dozens of them were coming. Broken bodies spilling up the bleachers, some crawling on all fours, others folding unnaturally to fit through gaps in the railings. And though they made no sound, their helmets tilted in unison, fixed on us, hollow holes for eyes eating us alive with their stare. We hit the gate at the very top and shoved it hard. It screeched open just enough for us to slip through, our hands raw from the cold metal. The whistle shrieked behind us, so loud it pierced my skull. We didn't stop running until we were blocks away, the stadium shrinking behind us like it had never existed. When we finally stopped to breathe, Emily and I collapsed against the curb, shaking and crying in the dark. The next morning, I drove by in daylight, more out of disbelief than anything, to see if it had been some insane dream. The field was empty, the bleachers spotless, no footprints, no broken rails, nothing to suggest what we saw, but Emily refuses to talk about it. She won't go near that part of town, won't even drive past the stadium. Me? I can't sleep most nights, because I still hear the whistle. It comes when the night is too quiet, piercing through my head like it never stopped. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see them. The faceless players climbing the bleachers, their movements jerking closer and closer through the dark, and every time I wonder. The gate didn't slam shut behind us that night. It swung open, almost like it was letting us go. But what if it wants us to come back? Story 3. They say a football field is just grass, lines, and bleachers. But I'll never look at one the same way again. Because on a quiet weekend, at a simple family picnic, I watched my child vanish before my eyes, swallowed by something that should never exist in this world. And I'm telling you this because I need someone to believe me. It was Sunday afternoon, warm but not too hot. My wife packed sandwiches, juice boxes, and a blanket, and we headed to the high school football field with our kids, Daniel and Megan. The stadium was empty, silent, and almost peaceful. No crowd noise, no whistles, just wide open space under the lazy sky. We spread our things on the grass near the bleachers, laughing while the kids ran along the sidelines, chasing each other. Megan, only 7, shrieked with delight as Daniel, 9, darted after her. They made their way toward the goalposts, their small sneakers leaving tracks in the turf. I remember thinking how perfect it was, just us, no distractions. Then Megan ran through the left goalpost, and she was gone. Not stumbled, not fallen, gone. Her laughter cut off mid-breath. My heart stopped. I jumped to my feet, sprinting across the field as my wife screamed her name. The grass beneath the goalpost shimmered, and when I reached it, my legs nearly gave out. An outline, her outline, was burned into the turf. Like the grass had been singed into the shape of a little girl's body mid-run. Charred, black, but no smell of smoke. Just emptiness where my daughter had been seconds before. I fell to my knees, clawing at the grass, screaming her name. My wife joined me, weeping uncontrollably. Daniel clung to her arm, trembling, too frightened to move. That's when we heard it. The sound of cheering. It rolled across the field like a thunderous wave. Thousands of voices clapping, shouting, stomping, as if the stadium were packed full of fans. My head snapped up, and my heart nearly burst. The stands were no longer empty. Ghostly figures filled every seat, blurry at first, then sharp as if solid. Men, women, kids, spectators frozen in time, all dressed in clothes from different decades. Some wore hats from the 1950s, some jerseys from the 1980s. But all of them were staring down at us in silence, faces pale, eyes empty. The cheering continued, but their mouths did not move. The sound came from nowhere, rattling in my chest, growing louder by the second. My wife screamed, pulling Daniel close. I stood frozen, unable to breathe. The air thickened, pressing against me like invisible walls, and then the ghostly crowd moved. They clapped in unison, slowly, steadily, the sound echoing like thunder. and from somewhere above the field, a voice boomed through an unseen microphone. "Next player." I felt sick. My mouth went dry. The grass beneath the opposite goalpost shimmered just as it had before. My stomach turned to ice when Daniel whimpered, hiding his face in his mother's chest. The crowd erupted, stomping their ghostly feet. "Next player!" the voices roared, a chant now, deafening. I grabbed my wife's arm, yanking her up. "We're leaving, now!" But as we turned to run, the bleacher ghosts all rose from their seats at once. The entire stadium stood, arms raised, pointing at the field, not at nothing, at us. Their eyeless faces locked on, their mouths gaping open in silent screams. The sound of chanting grew louder, though none of them spoke. The ground itself seemed to shake beneath my feet. We ran. God, we ran so fast. I dragged my wife and son toward the gate at the edge of the field, not daring to look back. My legs burned, lungs screaming, but the voices followed. "Next player! Next player!" By the time we burst through the gate, the sound cut out. Silence fell so suddenly it rang in my ears. The bleachers were empty again. The goalpost shimmer was gone. The outline of my daughter, gone. Just quiet. Just grass. Like nothing had ever happened. We searched for hours. The police searched for days. No sign of her. They told us she must have run off or been taken. But I know the truth. We saw it. She was claimed. For weeks, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the roar of the invisible fans, the chant echoing inside my head. Next player. I thought avoiding the stadium would help, but last night, I woke to the faintest sound drifting through my window. Cheering. Faint. Distant. Getting louder. I looked outside. Our backyard was quiet. But in the distance, toward the town, I saw it. The stadium lights glowing bright against the midnight sky. They shouldn't have been on. And tonight, I'm terrified they want another player. Story 4. You don't really think about fear when you're an athlete. You think about strength, endurance, pushing limits. Fear belongs to the weak. At least, that's what I used to believe. But the night the stadium came alive, and the field tried to swallow me whole, fear claimed me like it had been waiting all along. I had just finished the hardest practice of my life. Coach had pushed me until my lungs burned and my muscles screamed. Everyone else left for the night, but I stayed behind to hit the showers. I told myself I wanted to cool down, to catch a few quiet minutes alone. But really, I just didn't want to go home. When I finally stepped back onto the concrete walkway, the stadium was dead quiet. The kind of silence that presses into your ears and makes you too aware of your own breathing. My bag felt heavier than usual as I slung it over my shoulder and started walking toward the exit. That's when I heard it. The clang, the metallic groan of the front gate slamming shut, hard enough to echo all the way back to where I stood. I froze, heart thudding. At first I thought maybe the janitor had locked up early, but no, the sound wasn't natural. It was too violent, like the stadium wasn't closing for the night. It was closing me in. I turned toward the field, and that's when the scoreboard flickered to life. In green digital letters, my name appeared. Player, Carter James. Opponent, unknown. My blood ran cold. I stood locked in place, staring up at it, trying to force a reasonable explanation. A prank, a glitch, something electrical. But the longer I stared, the more I felt the weight of it. That this wasn't a mistake. Then the field rippled. The turf under the stadium lights moved, like water disturbed by something heavy beneath its surface. My breath caught in my throat as dark shapes rose under the grass. Then, suddenly, hands. Pale, skeletal hands tore through the turf as if it were nothing but thin fabric. They clawed their way out, dozens of them, breaking through the ground. Not living bodies, not human players, but twisted figures pulling themselves free. Helmets that were smashed, jerseys that hung in strips, faces that weren't faces anymore, sunken, eyeless sockets staring at me, all while the scoreboard snapped to a countdown clock. 3:59. The game had started. One of them lunged first, sprinting toward me with bones snapping under its padded body. I stumbled backwards, barely dodging as its claws grazed my jersey. My instinct screamed to run, but where? The gates were sealed, the bleachers loomed high, and the only open space was the cursed field itself. The whistle blew. It came from nowhere, piercing the air. All at once, the creatures formed into a team-like line on the far side, crouching like players ready for the snap, their helmets tilted in perfect unison toward me, though no eyes stared out. And then they charged. I ran. I don't think I've ever run that fast in my life. My cleats pounded against the turf, but it wasn't turf anymore. It shifted under me like slick liquid, every step threatening to drag me down. Hands reached up from below, clutching at my ankles, trying to trip me. Their grip was ice cold, bones splintering through shredded gloves. The scoreboard beeped again. Touchdown. Opponent leads. I gasped for air, panic filling every corner of my mind. This wasn't a game. It was a hunt. A new timer blinked on the board above. 1:30 time remaining. 1:45. These things weren't just here to play me. They were here to finish me. One slammed into my side with impossible force, sending me sprawling onto the dirt. Its face drew close to mine, empty sockets dripping shadows that slid across my cheek like oil. I screamed, shoving it off with everything I had. Its body broke apart like chalk dust, but as the particles hit the ground, more hands began to claw up from below. Every one I touched only made more of them rise. The whistle blew again, sharper, angrier. The scoreboard blinked red with 2 words: delay penalty. And from the center of the field, the ground tore wide open. A pit of absolute blackness yawned there, hands clawing up in a frenzy like they were desperate to drag me down. The cheering started next, loud and thunderous, though the bleachers were empty. It sounded like thousands of phantom fans screaming for blood. "No, no!" I cried, staggering toward the fence. I threw my bag against the chain link, tried to climb, but the moment my hand gripped the top, my arm went numb. The stadium itself pulsed like a living thing, electricity burning in the steel. The whistle blew a final time, and every creature lunged. Their bone hands wrapped around me, dozens of them, pulling, dragging. I screamed until my throat shredded, while the turf gave way beneath my feet. I was sinking into the soil, into the ripple, my body dragged into the game that would never end. The scoreboard burned brighter. Final scoreboard: player, Carter James, eliminated. Opponent, unknown, Victor. The last thing I heard before the turf sealed over my head was the thunder of cheering, and in that endless pitch black, the truth hit me. This wasn't the first game, and it wouldn't be the last. The stadium wasn't a place, it was a predator, and I was only one more player in its collection. Story 5. People talk about revisiting the places of their youth as if it's a sweet, sentimental trip, walking down memory lane, reliving old joys. But what they don't tell you is that sometimes the past doesn't just sit quietly, waiting for you to remember it. Sometimes it remembers you too, and sometimes it wants you back. It was my wife's idea. "Let's go to the old football field," she'd whispered one chilly evening, her hand squeezing mine. "That's where we first met, remember? Maybe it'll make us feel young again." I smiled, though my bones already ached from the thought of climbing those bleachers. But she was right. We first locked eyes right there, beneath the floodlights, 2 awkward teenagers surrounded by the chaos of cheerleaders, jerseys, and roaring fans. That place had changed our lives once, so we went. The stadium hadn't been used in years. Rust crept up the railings, paint peeled from the walls, and the grass was wild and uneven. But the bleachers still stood, long rows of empty seats yawning under the dim glow of the moon. We sat down halfway to the top, close enough to see the field clearly, but far enough up to feel small against its vastness. At first, it was quiet. Too quiet, actually. The kind of silence that presses into your ears and lets you hear your heartbeat. The place smelled like damp metal and old dust. I wrapped my coat tighter and chuckled. Romantic, huh? She nudged me, rolling her eyes. We're here for the memories, not the ambiance. And maybe that's why we didn't leave when it started. Because at first, it was memories. Shapes began to stir on the field. Faint shadows at first, then sharper, more defined. An entire football team appeared, suited up as if they had been waiting beneath the soil all this time. Cheerleaders formed lines along the sideline, their pom-poms glinting in faint light that shouldn't have existed there. The marching band clustered at the far end, faint specters with shining instruments. The players ran drills. The cheerleaders shouted. The band puffed into ghostly horns. And though none of it made a sound, I swore I could feel it. The vibration of stomping feet, the rhythm of drums, the pulsing roar of a game night crowd. My wife leaned forward, tears bright in her eyes. "It's just like it used to be," she whispered. And she was right. The faces on that field weren't strangers. They were kids we had once known. Teammates, classmates, cheer captains, all playing out the same moments we had watched decades ago. Nostalgia swept over me, bittersweet and heavy. I almost smiled until they all turned to look at us, not one at a time, not gradually, in perfect, horrifying unison. The players froze mid-dash, helmets turning toward the bleachers. The cheerleaders stopped halfway through their pyramids, their faces locked on ours. The ghostly crowd raised their heads in perfect synchronization. Every single one of them was staring straight at us. The air froze in my chest. My wife's hand clamped down hard over mine. Why are they looking?" she stammered. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My mouth was too dry, my tongue thick with terror. Then, through the line of players, I saw them. 2 figures, smaller, younger, familiar. It was us. My younger self, helmet tucked beneath my arm, dirt smeared across my cheek. Her younger self, pom-poms, sparkling under the light, hair tied up, eyes wide with laughter. We were there, standing among the shadows, exactly as we had looked that night we first met. But something was wrong. Blood streaked down her cheeks like black tears. His grin dripped red from the corners of his mouth. Their eyes were hollow pits that glistened with wet darkness. And yet, despite the horror twisting their faces, they moved toward us, hand in hand. Slowly. Deliberately. "No," my wife whispered beside me. "That's not us. That's not us." The younger version stepped forward, and the team of ghostly players followed, their helmets tilting downward like broken marionettes. The cheerleaders dragged their pom-poms across the turf, their eyes locked open, their teeth gritted in silent screams. I pulled at my wife's arm, urging her to move, to stand, to go. But her eyes remained fixed on them, on herself. The younger version lifted her pom-poms in silent cheer, then snapped her head to the side, blood dripping, staring like a predator. The field rippled, the turf heaving like breathing lungs. Dark hands clawed upward from beneath the grass, not to reach us yet, but to hold the path open. The stadium came alive with an invisible crowd, their cheers shaking the metal beneath our feet. And over the thunder of 1,000 unseen voices, I heard a whisper, sharp and unrelenting, carried directly to us. "You don't belong here anymore." But they do. The shadows lunged forward, rushing the bleachers in jerky, inhuman movements. I staggered, pulling my wife with everything I had. We tore down the steps, hearts hammering, as the echo of our own younger selves chased us through the rows. Behind us, the crowd roared louder, the field boiling with ghostly bodies. We didn't stop running until we were outside the gates, the night air colder than ever. Only then did I risk turning back. The stadium was empty again. Silent. Still. But I saw two figures in the distance standing side by side in the center of the field. Young, bright, lifelike, us, smiling from the shadows of our youth and dripping blood into the grass. Story 6. People always say stadiums are haunted. At least that's what gave us the stupid idea in the first place. I wish now I had laughed it off, gone home, and left the place to its silence. Because I can promise you this, some games never end. It was midnight when we hopped the fence. 6 of us, me, my buddy Eric, his girlfriend Jenna, and 3 others from our little group. The town stadium had been closed for years, but everyone knew the stories. Shadows under the bleachers, the sound of crowds when the gates were locked, whispers about players who never left. Haunted football field, Eric said, cracking a grin as he landed on the grass. Maybe we'll see the ghost of a referee. Bet he finally calls a fair game. We all laughed nervously. You know the kind of laugh you do when you're pretending the fear is funny, but your arms are already prickling with goosebumps? That was us. We walked across the field, flashlights bobbing. The place smelled stale, like wet concrete and old rubber. Every step echoed in a way that didn't feel normal, as if the ground itself was hollow. We were halfway across the 50-yard line when it happened. The floodlights turned on. Every single one of them blazed to life at once, blinding us at first. The stadium roared into brightness, shadows scattering from the sudden glow. We flinched, covering our eyes, swearing under our breath. When my vision cleared, my stomach felt like ice. The field wasn't empty anymore. Dozens of players ran in full formation, helmets gleaming, cleats tearing against the turf, shoulder pads colliding with brutal force, except all of it was silent. No grunts, no whistles, no footfalls, just bodies clashing in eerie, perfect quiet. I stood frozen, unable to believe what I was seeing. I could see their movements so clearly, their mouths opening in shouts, their jaws clenched, their chests heaving and straining. But there was no sound at all. Not from the players, not from the field, not even from the echo of impact. It was like watching a muted film, but the film was alive, and we were standing in it. Jenna whispered, "What the hell is this?" Her voice sounded wrong against the silence, too loud, too sharp. It felt like dropping a rock into a perfectly still pond, and that's when one of them noticed. A player, helmet tilted, stopped mid-run. His face mask turned, his empty black visor locking onto where we stood. And then another stopped, and another. Within seconds, the entire game ground to a halt. Every body froze. Every faceless head turned slowly, perfectly in sync, until dozens of silent players stared directly at us. Something inside me snapped. I hissed at my friends, "Run! Now!" But we didn't. We couldn't. It was like their gaze pinned us to the ground. My pulse thundered in my ears, too loud against the crushing silence of the stadium. Then the players began to move. Not play, not drills. They slowly walked toward us. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, like broken dolls with strings pulled by unseen hands. Their helmets tilted too far, their legs bent at angles that made no sense. And still, not a single sound. Jenna screamed. That broke us free. We bolted for the bleachers, shoes slamming against the turf, terrified breaths leaving our throats. But the bleachers weren't empty anymore. Ghostly faces packed the seats. A crowd, translucent and pale, staring with empty eyes. Their mouths stretched wide as if cheering, but still, no sound, no noise, just that endless suffocating silence. Eric cursed, dragging Jenna by the hand. We veered toward the nearest gate, but the players were faster, unnatural. They didn't run. They bent and snapped across the field, closing the distance like insects skittering over water. Their helmets gleamed, collapsing shadows stretching behind them. The first one reached us. Eric swung his flashlight at its helmet with a crack. The beam flickered, sparks flying, but the noise died in my throat. The sound didn't exist here. My light flared once, then died completely, leaving the field in unnatural brightness from above. The scoreboard flickered alive. Player, visitors. Opponent. Home, round 1. I stared up, heart in my throat, as the ghostly crowd suddenly stood in one synchronized motion, clapping invisibly, their mouths stretching wider. The whistle blew. Not in the air, not around us, inside my head. High-pitched, tearing, piercing through my skull. I dropped to my knees, my vision swimming. Eric fell beside me, clutching his ears. Jenna sobbed, shaking violently, and in that moment, I understood. This wasn't just a vision. We weren't witnessing a game, we had become part of it. The players advanced in formation, emotionless, relentless. Shadows fell long across the turf, reaching like black water to pull us down. I scrambled back, but the ground rippled under me, soft and endless, like stepping onto a stomach that wanted to devour me whole. The scoreboard ticked down. 3 da, 2:59, 2:58. The game was beginning, and the silent crowd leaned forward, thousands of heads tilting in unison, their eyeless gaze fixed directly on us. For more stories like this, share and subscribe Goofy Horror.